how to grow as an artist is to do things that you don't know how to do.
Right. Today I'm speaking with the very talented Zoe Lister-Jones.
Zoe Lister-Jones, everybody!
Actress and filmmaker who stars in the sitcom Life in Pieces.
Band-Aid, the movie she stars in and made.
You're in a new film called Beau is Afraid. She's in theaters nationwide.
Writer, a producer, a director, and an actor.
It's nice to wear so many different hats, you know, because they're all different muscles to flex.
Today, we dive into the creative process behind Zoe's newest creation, Slip, the binge-worthy comedy series that involves parallel realities and alternate identities. We talk about making deeply authentic work, the responsibility she shoulders to empower other women in the arts. Zoe's a friend. She is a star very much on the rise and an artist in the absolute truest sense of the word. Before we dive in, this episode is brought to you by Roka. Now, I get asked fairly consistently about the glasses that you see me wearing on the show. Well, the answer is Roka. These are specifically the Hamilton frames. I love them. All the frames that Roka makes are high performance, super light, amazing optics. They've got tons of great styles. They never ever slip off my face, and I'll be sharing a bit more about Roka later. But for now, enough. Let's do the thing. Well, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me back.
I was telling you before we started that it's been so cool just to kind of watch your career blossom over the years. Like, you're just like blowing up and you're in all this cool stuff. And it's just, you know, it's so fun for me as somebody who knows you to kind of see you popping up all over the place. So congratulations on all of that.
Thanks,
it's cool.
Rich.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a particularly exciting year for sure.
But I feel like this year is really a tipping point for you.
Thanks.
There's a lot of high prestige stuff that we're going to get into that's about to kind of pop in a big way, I think, right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels like you've done so many things, but every new thing that you do is kind of a next evolution of like stepping into, you know, you could just be doing the same thing, but you're stretching yourself with each thing. Like, you go from co-writing and co-directing or starring, and then, you know, writing something that only you did, and then writing and directing something that only you did. And now we have Slip that's just about to come out that you wrote, directed, starred in, produced. Mm-hmm. And you're, I don't know, like in every frame of this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like, you're the same, but I feel like I was a very fearful kid growing up in Brooklyn. And strangely, I think I push myself towards things that scare me, even though it's like anathema to who I am at my core. I think, especially in terms of the work I do, yeah, I try to lean into the unknown, and this is definitely the biggest foray so far, because I've never created my own television series. So I've written and directed and starred in my own films, which is like also scary as hell. But to do it in this long a format where I am in sort of every frame was daunting, but thrilling.
Did you write every episode of Slip?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it was nuts.
And you directed every episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, even, you know, the most talented showrunners, they'll kick it off and then they'll oversee a writer's room. Just for people that are listening or watching who don't really kind of understand how it works, they'll put their imprimatur on a show by creating the tone and maybe writing the first couple episodes and popping in and writing one here or there. But it's very much a collaborative effort. And this feels, you know, to be signature in a really unique way, and just the kind of endurance of like having your fingers into every aspect of it while also being on camera. Like, that's a high wire act. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote the whole thing, the whole season in quarantine. And it was really a lifeline, but it is unconventional for one person to write a whole season of television. Also unconventional for one person to direct it, because generally you have a number of directors throughout a season. But I had come off of making a studio movie, and there were so many cooks in the kitchen, and I think it was really intentional that I create something that just felt wholly mine. And it's such a personal story that, I think my writing all 7 was a protective measure in some ways, so that I could go out and say, this is the thing. And if you like it, then let's make it. But there's not really a ton of wiggle room in terms of what it is. I didn't want there to be compromise. And astoundingly, Roku, I think probably it's a function of them being a new streaming service.
Yeah.
They gave me a green light to series without giving me one script note, which is unheard of.
Wow.
So they really just allowed for me to make exactly the show that I envisioned, which was so healing as an artist.
How does it work? Like, usually in the kind of traditional, conventional Hollywood sense, when you want to create a television show, you kind of create the book, or what is it called? Like the kind of
Bible.
The Bible, right? And you write a pilot, and you go through these various stages where you have to get green lights along the way, and all these cooks are in the kitchen approving things, giving notes, etc. And you're lucky enough to get just a pilot greenlit, but that's no guarantee of anything. But now we're in a whole new world in which these streaming services are greenlighting entire series without that kind of pilot litmus test to, kind of validate a project.
Yeah. It's an interesting time. Like, in some ways, I mean, television is obviously a very bold medium. It's like really exciting, and movies are in a much more tenuous space. But there's still a lot of fear-based decision-making. So the fact that I was given the amount of trust I was as an artist felt pretty singular as an experience. It was sort of a unicorn.
Yeah.
And to me, like, any fear-based decision-making in a creative venture is just
Death.
Yeah. But when money's on the line, and that intersection of art and commerce is sort of like knocking loudly at everyone's door, it's challenging. And I think, there was something about this project. I was able to make it inexpensively, which I think also afforded me more creative freedom,
little liberation.
Yeah,
there.
and I suppose because I had, some films under my belt, that there was some more trust that was afforded me. But
you have a track record.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Roca is an interesting kind of home for this, because on the one hand, all the streamers have expanded the aperture of what's possible and have created kind of a tapestry for a lot more creativity and certainly a lot more, kind of content. But we're also in a bit of a contraction with this, like the sort of halcyon days of like throwing money around and leaving creators to do whatever they want. That's sort of played out at the bigger streamers, Netflix, et cetera. And they're reeling everything back and laying people off. But here comes Roku, like a little sprout, like I'm like, Roku, like what is Roku? Isn't that like a box that you have that, like, I don't even know what Roku is.
Yeah.
Like, wait, they're making shows now? Like, it's confusing from a consumer point of view. Like, I don't know, like all these new shows come up. I can't even keep track of where they are and how to find them. It becomes, there's sort of this diaspora of all these different kind of places to find stuff. But, this is like, we're in this nascent stage of trying to, figure out how to create a media landscape that makes sense.
Like the early days of AMC, when we were all like, what is AMC?
Right.
And it was like...
And they did Mad Men,
And they did Mad Men and Breaking
like,
Bad.
what?
And then suddenly, like, so it's exciting to get in, early in a streamer's nascent stage, because I think there is more room to do really bold filmmaking. And this is surely the boldest thing I've ever made, and is, really sex forward and unapologetically sort of centered around female sexual pleasure. And so, I'm like, big ups to Roku for
Yeah,
for taking
it's
the
definitely, it's definitely pushing the envelope, and and it's kind of NSFW in certain respects, but very bold and honest in that regard, and yet at the same time highly relatable. So maybe explain, before we go any further,
Yeah.
let's talk about what it actually is, so people understand what we're talking about.
Sure. Slip follows a woman named May Cannon, played by yours truly. And when we meet her, she's restless in her marriage and ends up cheating on her husband one night and wakes up the next morning to discover that she's now married to the dude she cheated on her husband with. And then over the course of the season, learns that through orgasm, she's being transported into a multiverse. And so each episode, she's sort of being launched sexually into all of her parallel lives and relationships.
Right. So it has this weird kind of everything everywhere all at once multiverse aspect of it. Aspect to it that's kind of sci-fi-esque or kind of fantasy oriented, and yet at the same time it feels very wedded to the work that you've always been doing, all the way back to Breaking Upwards and when was that, 2008, 2009 or something like that, like your first movie with Daryl, that is really grappling with what it means to be in a relationship and find happiness and freedom within the construct of monogamy. And this Slip being written during the pandemic, where we're all kind of stuck at home with our partners or whatever, and we're questioning our lives.
Yeah.
There's something very universal that transcends just, relationships, that speaks to this idea of questioning our lives and could it be better in kind of a sliding doors sort of way. If, we all have that experience where we meet somebody and there's a spark, and regardless of your station in life, you're immediately sort of future tripping and playing house in in a kind of fantasy, idealized way of what it would be like if I was with that person, and you're just playing that out all the way to the end.
Yes.
To kind of experience oh, well, if I actually did that, what would that be like? And how does that then make me sort of consider in a revisionist history way, how I've been feeling about, my life as it is in reality. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a avid future tripper. And I think it was exciting for me to sort of narrativize what those fantasies would look like, as you said, if they were actually played out. Because oftentimes the fantasy will never be.
Right. You quickly find out this is nothing like
the reality. will always disappoint you. But I do think as universal as those sort of existential questions are around could I be happier? And what do I do with that feeling of wanting more, and the what ifs and the paths not chosen? All of those questions just became so loud in quarantine. As you said, regardless of your station, if you were stuck in a relationship or if you were feeling so isolated and alone. And so I think this really was my way of, I guess, trying to answer those questions for myself as I was also, ending a very substantial relationship and marriage. So it was mirroring some of my personal life. And I think so much of my work, as you said, has been about the nuances and complexities of relationship dynamics. And so this was also very much about that, but I wanted to do it through a more fantastical lens and give myself an opportunity and also the audience an opportunity to go on a sort of wild adventure.
Right. Yeah. Relationships through the Matrix.
Yeah,
exactly. Some level, and it's really fun, but it's also it's there's a very kind of strong female empowerment component of being vulnerable, but not shying away from really confronting sexuality head on. You're not hiding from any of that. It's front and center throughout the whole thing, which is like a really bold choice, right? And to say that like Roku was like, cool, go for it, like that speaks to, you know, some level of like confidence in you as a you know, creative force.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have been given that much room to explore female sexuality. I think, you know, I was raised by by an amazing woman, Ardell Lister, an artist in her own right, who really taught me to look at media through like a critical lens, especially when it came to the way that women were represented. And so this was an exciting opportunity for me to sort of subvert the lens that we have come to just know, in the way that so many, I guess, that female sexuality in particular has been portrayed in media, which is oftentimes voyeuristic in nature, even though we're not even aware of it. But that sort of male gaze that
salacious through a male point of view.
Yeah. And the objectification of those women in those scenes. I think this was such an exciting opportunity to make something that was erotic. Like I really wanted to make something that was going to turn people on, but that was also messy and unapologetic, and that created sex scenes that were the centerpiece of every episode, but that were very much from a woman's perspective, and very much like, I guess pushing the boundaries of how much sex we are allowed to see. It's such a strange thing, I think, especially in media, like the dichotomy between like Puritanism and salaciousness, and we're always riding that line. And I think female pleasure has always been sort of at the crux of that, right? Because we don't really want to get into it.
Right.
We kind of just want them to be, you know, objects of lust and desire rather than agents of it.
Yeah. But the device that you use, which is simultaneously kind of hilarious and provocative, is this notion that like orgasm is this wormhole through which you travel through time and enter into parallel universes where you have sex with somebody and then suddenly this is your life, like that has always been your life with this person, and then you have to live with that, and that makes you kind of reflect on like, is this better? Like this fantasy that I had and now I'm in it, is this better than what I had before? Yeah,
that like grass is always greener paradigm, where you then get to the other grass and you're like, this one sucks too. You know, now what?
But like, to be fair, is it I wasn't clear. Is it your boyfriend or your husband? Your husband, right? Like, I mean, he's Dorkville, like all the way, right? Like you're clearly unhappy with this guy and unsatisfied, but there's something stable about it. And you know.
I mean, in the show, yes, the relationship has come to a standstill for sure. I mean, there's only so much you can do in half an hour. So I didn't want it to be so black and white that, you know, that you're like, get out of there. Because I think there is like this sort of comfort, the creature comforts of a long-term relationship, or any relationship really, you know, have a lot of value. And that idea of home is so central to like finding stability in one's life. And I think because my character comes from a foster upbringing, home in general is like a pretty tenuous thing for her. And so over the course of the season, I think she's sort of pondering the decisions she's made and wondering if she should go back, maybe less about the person that she left and more about that sense of stability and home and what that means and how we can find that internally rather than in other people.
But this notion of you know, always searching for more or trying to find a way to fill that like hole that can only be filled through some sort of spiritual solution that transcends the material is played out in many ways throughout the show, and I'm only at the inception of the show. But I love the fact that she's a curator at this museum, and there's this exhibit, and it's called The Hungry Ghosts. Obviously, it's very intentional. I've read Gabor Mate's book, The Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, and that idea of we're just, we're craven in certain ways, and we're always looking for more, and we're trying to make ourselves feel whole through what we can grab onto in the material world. And no matter what that thing is that we grab onto, it doesn't quite get us there. And we're deluded into the sense that it lives just a little bit outside of ourselves, and it's going to be the next thing and the next thing. And that gets played out through sexuality in the narrative, of Slip. But how does that do you come to some resolution with that? And how is this playing out, for yourself? Because obviously these are questions that you're grappling with in your own life.
Yeah. I think the Hungry Ghost is a fascinating archetype because I've never struggled with substance abuse, but I think we all are addicts, and like you're saying, that there's always this sort of insatiable quest for something to fill that restlessness or vacuous place in our souls.
Yes. When you finally win that Academy Award, or when you get that, external validation that you've been working towards your whole life, then you will feel complete.
And you will never feel complete. And I think that's, it's such a universal trope and trait that we're all constantly facing. And so I did kind of want to look at addiction through that lens, where whether it's love or sex addiction or something even sort of more ephemeral than that, just that hunger that lives in all of us, and how we each choose to try to satiate it, however misguided the attempts are. And I mean, I so admire all of your spiritual practices. I don't have enough of a steady spiritual practice, but I was raised in a very spiritual home, and I guess at my core, it is something that I return to when I'm really in need. But I totally struggle with it. I think that I don't identify as a love addict, but I'm very interested in love addiction because I think we all are sort of, craving that connection in a way that will never be fulfilled, in the way that love has been designed. The idea of love, the narrative of love has been designed to totally deceive us, And so I think, especially, not to make it so gendered, but especially I think for women, what we're seeking in romantic relationships will always be just slightly off the mark. And I think that has been fed to us culturally. But I think this show does really delve into things that I definitely struggle with personally around intimacy and sex and that sort of addiction to wanting more.
We're brought to you today by Roka. Glasses are not something you normally think about as a piece of performance gear, which, when you think about it, is kind of insane because you can't perform at your best if you can't see. Well, the geniuses at Roka basically rebuilt eyewear from the ground up. No matter how active you are or how much you sweat, these things never slip or fall off your face. They're super durable, they look awesome, and they've got tons of super classy modern styles to choose from. I've been rocking Rokas for about 4 years at this point. I love them. I'm a big fan of the Hamilton style in gloss black. That's this frame right here, as well as clear, or I guess they call them vintage on the website. And if you want to try them out for yourself, you can do that right now and unlock 20% off your order with the code RICHROLL at roka.com. Or you can click the link in the description below. Okay, back to the show. Well, let's go back there. I mean, you mentioned your mom. Your mom is a central figure in your life. If you follow Zoe on Instagram, you know, the affection that you have for your mom is really touching. You know, she's obviously had like a big impact on your life. Your dad was an artist too.
Yeah.
You grew up in Brooklyn, two crazy artists who were both kind of, you know, your dad was a photographer. Like they're in media, they're challenging narratives, I'm sure, and you're growing up in an environment that is, I would suppose on some level, slightly, if not, you know, altogether transgressive.
Yes.
And you're, you know, shaving your head and, you know, being like, were you a goth kid? Like, what's going on?
I shaved my head when I was 11. I wasn't
11?
goth. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I was really into ska.
Who were the bands?
I loved the Specials, the Selector,
for
Madness.
Sure.
But yeah, I guess
Fishbone.
no, I didn't.
That was West Coast.
Yeah, I didn't get into like West Coast. I was
Yeah.
sort of a purist in terms of that British scene, but I was definitely raised in a transgressive household, almost so transgressive that like the only way for me to rebel was to be conservative.
Right. Yeah. Gonna be an investment banker.
Yeah. My mom took me to get my head shaved. It wasn't me like rebelling.
Oh, wow.
Like
That's a trip.
it was my idea.
Oh my God.
But yeah, I think it was at a time for me when I was getting a lot of male attention from older men, and I think unconsciously, this is only in retrospect that I think I shaved it in order to as an attempt at some sort of invisibility. It did the opposite. It got me so much attention and bullying, and you know, it was really a tough couple years when I was playing with sort of gender expression and androgyny in that way. But yeah, my parents are both really cool, prolific artists. My mom's a video artist, and they both made very personal work. So I think from a young age, I had these really amazing examples of what it looks like to fuse those two worlds. I really don't know any other way. I've never made anything that is not pretty deeply personal.
Yeah.
At its core, but yeah, and they've just been so supportive of me throughout my life and pushed me to go further, and they exposed me to so much transgressive shit as a young person, which, you know, at that age you're like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. but it had such an impact on me as an artist.
So we think of Brooklyn now as this, you know, gentrified, you know, kind of hipster village. But, you know, when you were growing up, that predated kind of that wave, right?
Yeah.
So the experience of being a kid in Brooklyn and having these artists as parents, yeah, there's no way that, you know, you don't emerge from that with a very unique kind of worldview. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Brooklyn in the 80s, the neighborhood that I was raised in was, it was definitely tough. We were robbed a lot. It was like, I think my nervous system is broken. There's no repairing it. And also, you know, but then I was a part of the sort of New York art world because of my parents, and I was an only child, so I was being dragged to openings and events and performance art pieces, and so
right. Is this like abandoned building, you know, kind of weird, you know, like edgy?
Totally. Yeah. I remember like my mom taking me, this was as a maybe like 12, to this screening of this Japanese cult film that was like really fucked up. Really fucked up. But she's such a culture vulture, you know, and she's so curious. And I was, you know, she didn't have a babysitter. So I was exposed, to just wild shit that, and her work too was really wild and transgressive, and So it's cool to see, the impact of both my
Yeah.
parents' work on my own.
It's interesting, like we're, as a parent, the whole kind of conventional notion around protecting your kids from anything, that might traumatize them, like not taking them to, a certain kind of movie too soon. But all the interesting people that I know that are doing interesting things in the world were the people who were going to those movies way too early, So I have a whole different view on that.
Yeah. I think I saw Do the Right Thing in the theater when it came out. I think I was like, 5 or something. Like, a lot.
Yeah,
It was a lot. Yeah.
But what's wild about you is you kind of come out of that like nitty gritty, art world, and you've done a lot of stuff in that independent DIY context, but you've segued and moved into this sort of very you've been embraced by the traditional Hollywood system. And you've kind of stepped into being, a glamorous exemplar of that, right? Like you really lean into the glamour. Like you do. Yeah. I mean, like how many photo shoots a week do you do? It's insane, right?
Well, right now with press, there's a lot. It's like, my Instagram is a little bit insufferable, but I do love. Listen, I'm a real.
But the choices that you make as a creative are like feel very true to the ethos of how you were brought up, nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up broke. My parents were broke, and they could never make a living from their art. And I think I really bore witness to the heartache of that life. And it made me not want to be an artist. I was pretty adamantly a capitalist. My parents were both
not surprising.
I was I remember someone asking me in high school, what's your main, what do you want from life? And I was like, money. And they were like, you disgust me. But I was I want stability. I don't want that life that I saw. Because it wasn't just being broke. It was
feeling unsafe and
that, but also the emotional component of seeing two incredible artists sort of have to abandon those dreams. That's a really painful thing for a kid to witness, really porous and sensitive kid to witness, that both of them had to get. My dad had a lot of odd jobs. He was a telemarketer. He worked at different magazines. He worked at a video game company. He was just trying to scrape to get by. My mom started teaching video art at Rutgers. And I think neither of them ever were able to really put the focus on their art again. And the, it's that sort of age-old question of if no one sees your art, what is that? What impact does that have on you as an artist? And both of them, my mom is in museum collections and stuff, but could never make a living. And I think it's paralyzing. And I saw how paralyzing it was. I saw how painful it was. And when I got a scholarship to go to Tisch for acting, I was like, no. To put all my eggs in that basket. And my mom was the one to be like, no, you should go. And I did.
Had you been acting in high school, building up to that? How did that even happen to begin with?
I had acted in a couple high school productions. I was really shy. But by the end of, by my senior year, I was acting more in high school, and then I auditioned and got in and got this scholarship. And so I think also because there was a financial component, my mom was like, "You're going." And
so the financial component was almost equally as important as the idea of becoming an actress was secondary to that.
Yeah. I think my mom also saw that I had love for that and didn't want me at such a young age to be so cynical. You know, like I think, and I really am grateful for her, because she's a deeply cynical person, but she was trying to save me from that. And then, like, miraculously, in one of the toughest industries, I was able to make a living from my art. And so that's all a long way of saying I started to work in TV before TV was cool. You know, like I was doing sitcoms, and it was not cool. It was not like something that I was necessarily super proud of in terms of you know, my street cred. But to be able to make a living, like I was just like, this is the coolest thing in the world. Like this is beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm still just so grateful to have been given those opportunities and to be able to own a home. You know, like my parents never owned a home. My dad still has never owned a home. Like, so I think I've always had a really pragmatic approach to the industry.
Yeah, you seem to kind of move back and forth between these worlds. I mean, like we mentioned, you did Breaking Upwards. Did that go to Sundance? I mean, that really put you on the map. That was you know, the first thing that you and Daryl did together. Yeah,
that premiered at South by Southwest, and that was our first. We made, my ex-husband and I, Daryl, made it for $15,000. So it was a real labor of love and teensy weensy, and then it opened all these doors.
Sure.
For both of us as a team. So we were really then billed as a
But not like
team.
A financial windfall, you know?
No, God, no.
But in terms of that, like street cred, right? Like indie filmmaker, cool, challenging monogamy. This is a recurrent theme through all the stuff that you do all the way through Slip. But then, like doing all this TV stuff. Like you've done, like it's a rite of passage for a young New York actor to do Law and Order, but you did like Law and Order to the 10th degree. Like you did every iteration of Law and Order. Like I'm obsessed with Law and Order.
Really?
I've seen like every episode.
Wait,
like,
I didn't know that about you.
It's like a narcoleptic for me. Like I don't know why, but like for some reason, like when I can't sleep, like an episode of Law and Order,
like, dun, dun,
it just like, you know, it's, despite the fact that it's about crime and people doing awful things, it like lulls me into some kind of calm. I don't know what what that says about me. So I've seen you in many different, you know, versions of Law, like Criminal Intent, the SUV. It's like, it's always funny when you go back and you watch the really old ones, because there's so many amazing actors doing incredible things that you see in these small parts in Law and Order. This is kind of like a training ground. I don't know if it's still the case, like they've kind of rebooted it more recently. But I'm always amused when you see an actor show up in Law and Order and then like they show up again playing a totally different character. Like they don't care about that.
No, they don't care.
Yeah.
I think I did 4 in the span of like a year and a half, or 2 years.
Playing different people.
Entirely different people.
And they just ignore the fact that you were
Yeah.
showed up last year as somebody else. Yeah.
Well, it was each one was a different, you know, franchise. I was on Mothership, SVU, Criminal Intent, and then a short-lived Trial by Jury. But no, that's a total rite of passage, and that was. It is really like sort of boot camp, because you do have to embody these wildly different characters. And I remember auditioning for Law and Order, and in the waiting room there was like, back in the days of VHS tapes, but like there was like a shelf of VHS tapes of every audition, and it was like Brad Pitt, like, you know, it was everyone. It was everyone. Like, and so you were seated in this waiting room being like, yes, one day.
Yeah, exactly.
I too.
Like you kind of have to do it if you're a young actor in New York, right?
Yeah, and I was doing a lot of theater at that time too, which was really fun, and also, you know, an incredible training ground as an actor. But I think that like indie film and guerrilla filmmaking for me was, it did allow, like I was able to afford to do those things because I was on television.
Sure.
And I think because I was bridging those two worlds, you know, that allowed for some street cred while I was on network sitcoms. And then also the sitcoms allowed for me to go, you know, make some really tiny things that cost nothing and made nothing.
Right, but a lot of people don't do that. I mean, you end up in New Girl, like I was telling you before the podcast, like my daughter Mathis is obsessed with New Girl. Like that's all she, you know Mathis, like that's all she cares about. Like there's a certain generation like for whom like that's the most important thing, and the way that The Office lives in a certain headspace for a lot of people. And in that sitcom world, like you could make an incredible living. You're paying your bills and you're able to create that financial stability that obviously was important to you. But it's very few people who then kind of branch out in the off season or in the, kind of the respite in between seasons to go do their own thing. And, the fact that like you sort of have seized those opportunities with Daryl and now without Daryl to like really make sure that you're making the most of that to build your career, to me reads like somebody who's incredibly ambitious and perhaps like creatively restless. Like you do those shows, you get paid really well, it's great, but are you really igniting your creative spark unless you're writing your own stuff and like exploring your own kind of interior emotional landscape as an artist in these other new and unique ways, and trying to, kind of create a career path through that over time.
Yeah. People get so easily pigeonholed in my industry and put into boxes. And so I think there was a ferocity to me trying to not be able to be put into one category too. But yeah, I think I don't know any other way to live. Like I don't know what to do with, it's not just a restlessness of spirit, but it's like a hunger to answer questions for myself that are sort of at the core of, the human journey. For me, like anything that's coming up, I'm a deeply sensitive and feeling person. So I'm always wrestling with sort of deep and existential queries that I kind of only know how to answer through my writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you made this independent movie, Consumed, about GMOs and farming and soil, and that's around the time that we met for the first time. But then during the pandemic, you make this How It Ends movie, like what can we do when we're all locked down, right? And then you write Slip during the pandemic as well, like using the confusion and the isolation and, kind of all the weird emotions that we were all having and channeling that into, something that you could express.
Yeah. Yeah. How It Ends was also both Daryl and I trying to figure out how to face, like, God, something unprecedented that we were all just, sitting around having to face ourselves, and I guess that's the most unprecedented part. And so that was the story of my character walking across Los Angeles on the last day on Earth with her younger self and having a conversation with her younger self, because I was trying to do so much inner child work at the time, and I did not know how to talk to my younger self. I still don't really know, but the movie was me trying to figure it out by actually writing a script between the two of us.
Well, what does that look like? Like we were joking again before the podcast. I texted Whitney Cummings. You were in her show, Whitney. You know Whitney, better than I do. But I was like, Whitney, Zoe's coming in. What should we talk about? And it's like all about trauma, inner child. Like she wants to go right to the psychology of everything.
Classic
right?
Whitney. Yeah.
I know. So that inner child work, or even like kind of not just childhood trauma, but like the adult trauma of like experiencing COVID and exploring that through art.
Yeah, I mean, we've all got just children wailing inside of us.
Oh my God.
And I guess that, that I think those children are probably in a weird way holding the reins of our hungry ghosts.
Yeah.
But I think we all can be sort of hijacked by very young people. And I've only in the last few years, I think really COVID sparked a much stronger or acute interest in who that person is and how to talk to her and how to settle her down. And I was going through some major life changes, and I still am, and I think at any threshold in a person's life, those voices get all the louder. And yeah, that process of like reparenting is I don't totally understand it, but I'm trying to.
But do you like, what is your modality for that? Do you have a therapist?
I'm in a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
I have an individual therapist. I'm also in group therapy, which is one of my favorite new modalities. I think it's really radical and cool work.
And in that group, are they friends or strangers?
No, strangers, and we can't speak outside of group. It's an amazing exercise in radical honesty. It's basically a place, it's like a safe space in which one can say anything and say it directly to another person. So it's like in individual therapy, which I also love, but it's a different dynamic. This is really testing the bounds of your interpersonal dynamics as a mirror to reflect what's happening outside of group therapy for you. So that's been really fascinating.
That's a level, like an enhanced level of trust that you have to muster. Also, because with the therapist, they're sort of bound by law, but then you have these other people. If they're strangers, you don't even know these people, and you're a public person.
Yeah, that's an interesting element to it that people are pretty cool about, but they have access to information about me that I don't have about them. But that really rarely comes up. I mean, I think for me, like what it's also meant to do is sort of replay family dynamics. So within those family dynamics, like the group leader is, the matriarch or patriarch, and then you've got how where you fit in a given family. And I spent like the first 4 sessions just weeping. And I was so confused by it. I called the group therapist after and was like, what is happening? But there's also such a raw humanity that is experienced, because it's not like you're taking turns talking. You have to find your way in to a conversation with 11 people. So if you want to like talk about something or relate to somebody or say, I have something that is really eating away at me and I need your help, like finding your voice is like such a huge hurdle. And for me as an only child, like I've never had to really do that. I mean, I have to do it in my professional life, but yeah, so it's just been so interesting. And then people will tell their stories, and there's so much universality to them that, yeah. So that's been cool. And personal therapy. There was a time when I was in couples therapy, individual therapy, and group therapy every week. So like, I was so out of my mind.
Right.
It was helpful, but now I'm only in two of the 3 every week.
It's a lot, man.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in therapy, though.
Yeah. But this question around monogamy seems to be this thing that has kind of lived, in your conscious and unconscious mind for a very long time, from the inception of your beautiful relationship with Daryl that went on for a long time and kind of, reached its, conclusion. And I love Daryl, that. Yeah. And I know you guys are still close and all of that, but the fact that this was, part and parcel of your first movie that you guys did together and still gets played out in Slip, like what is going on with how there's something like very cool about the female empowerment piece to that. but I feel like you're still trying to make sense of like what that means and how you live as a modern woman, a modern empowered woman, within the kind of construct of, conventional lifestyle and expectations.
Yeah, I mean, Breaking Upwards, as you said, was about non-monogamy. It was based on a real open relationship that Daryl and I were in, and Daryl and I, over the course of our 17-year relationship, were in and out of non-monogamy, and I think in some ways, Slip was me trying to contend with what that was and what that meant and how to take it into this new stage of my life. Like, we became polyamorous in the later stage of our relationship, and that, opens up a whole
Does that
new...
ever work?
Do you know
Rich, anyone who's explored that? Like, we have, this fantasy that, we can live these polyamorous lives, but I don't know anyone who's been able to like do that and achieve a level of happiness beyond what they were experiencing prior, or to do it in any successful way. And I'm friends with Neil Strauss. He wrote a whole book about it called The Truth. Like, read that book and you'll get a heavy dose of, what the reality of that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, my mom's best friends are polyamorous, and they have been for decades. And they sort of served as me and Daryl's mentors. They have made it work. But, like, whenever I would go meet with either one of them to be like, oh, what do I do? Like, this is crazy. They would tell me stories that were so harrowing.
Yeah, I mean, like the fantasy of like sexual liberation, has to contend with, all of our human frailty and jealousy and pettiness. I just don't know that I would, I mean, I'm not cut out for that.
Yeah, and there's a level of, at least in my experience, because I think some people do make it work. I definitely think non-monogamy can work. I think that's a very different thing than polyamory. And I think in some ways I question how much social conditioning plays into the difficulties that we assign to non-monogamy, because monogamy is also really fucking hard.
Sure.
We just don't see it. It doesn't have the same stigma.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't have the level of complexity, though. It might have a high degree of difficulty.
Right, that's true.
But, it's not, the difficulty doesn't live on that exponential scale of like, having to manage all different kinds of people. And it just seems very chaotic.
It is. It was chaotic. I guess like any extreme sport, there's you're chasing the adrenaline, and then your body's broken and you have to recover for a while.
Is the adrenaline about like the new? Because there's always like the allure of the new.
Yes.
That's the uncharted terrain where the answer lives, in this exciting, uncharted, adventure with this new person and the promise that holds.
I think it's the allure of the new. I think there is something exciting and sexy about the transgressive nature of what you're doing, radical honesty, if you can swing that. But I think the complexity really, for me at least, lies, I think for a lot of people, it's like the new is hot and also the illicit is hot. And the whole point of non-monogamy, when done well, is that it is all about communication and honesty. But, there's going to be omissions. You're still going to be chasing something illicit on some level. And that's, I think, where people get stuck.
Yeah. Well, it's a very kind of heightened peak experience, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And when it's like working well, it probably feels like being really high.
Yes.
But I would imagine the lows are pretty low too.
Real low. Really low.
So where do you land on that now? After, like, we don't have to get into the details of that adventure, but as somebody who's explored that, like, what is your kind of, summation on living that
I think that I
lifestyle?
would not be polyamorous ever again. I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever again. I think that I would not be polyamorous ever And I think I'm still, jury's out on non-monogamy. I think it's something that really scares me. I still am not like, but it scares me, but I'm always sort of game. Do you know what I mean? Like most things in my life that scare me. For me, I think many people play with don't ask, don't tell in non-monogamous relationships, and that doesn't work for me. It's a tell situation because I think, I think just based on my personal experience, honesty has to be at the forefront of any relationship.
And with all the therapy that you've done and that you're doing, how do you know, like when you're, pursuing a relationship or an experience from a healthy place versus acting out on some, perpetuating, some past trauma or acting out for attention or what have you?
Totally. Yeah. I don't know how you know those things. I mean, I think deep down when you're acting from the hungry ghost place. Like I will say to my therapist,
what is the need that you're trying to meet?
Yeah, and I can feel, I'm like, this feels addicty, Like you can tell the difference I think the difference is really a center of gravity, when you're experiencing something from a place of groundedness versus a place in which your feet are far off the ground.
And from that hungry ghost perspective, can you be okay just with yourself and not in pursuit of those experiences with others? And coming out of a marriage, a long-time relationship, and all the peaks and valleys, with Daryl, like where does that land you in terms of how you feel about yourself and how you engage with other people in relationship?
It's interesting coming out of something that was really half my life and all of my adult life. It's a difficult thing to distinguish what you're projecting onto a new relationship versus what that relationship is actually bringing to the table. So I guess that's been my biggest question, but definitely getting, post separation and also post COVID, which was like, wasn't even post COVID, but it was like when the world began to open up, everyone, regardless of what they had just come out of, was like so desperate for human connection and sexual connection and all of those things that the moment was ripe, and I did have to face a lot of those questions of what's driving this need and is this healthy? And I think for women especially, those questions are all the more complicated because I think, historically and societally, there's so much shame around sex and desire, and what it looks like to be unapologetically lustful as a woman, which I think the show really deals with.
Yeah, the show definitely explores that. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's another, huge theme in the work that you do, and kind of carry into how you create your projects from a professional perspective. I mean, in Band-Aid, which was really kind of your coming out party in terms of doing something on your own, like outside of your creative collaboration with Daryl, to write and direct your first independent movie. And you got a lot of attention for the fact that you hired an all-female crew, which had anybody ever done that before, at least at that scale?
I don't think so. Not at that scale, yeah.
So talk a little bit about like your decision to do that, the challenges in actually executing on that, and kind of the ripple effect of having done that.
I think, well, as I said, my mother had a great influence on me growing up, and really put my attention towards inequity, particularly gender inequity, and particularly in media. And so I think when I was given the opportunity to be in charge of my own hiring practices, I wanted to take a really big swing. And as an actor, I had witnessed that inequity firsthand. I mean, crews to this day, still, regardless of the amount of, lip service paid to how much is changing in our industry, they are really white and really male. And
I mean, female directors, like, I don't think it's changed that much.
Yeah, like directors,
decades.
I feel like there has been a shift, and I'm grateful for it. And I think that goes for the BIPOC community too. Like, there is more of a drive for inclusivity above the line, meaning with directors and screenwriters and whose stories can be told, and that's great. But there's a 100-person team below those people, and it's there that it's still really homogenized. And so I wanted to see what I could do to just really like shake up the system, because I think if you don't draw a hard line in the sand, you will just continue the pattern, because it's mostly about, people are very unwilling to take risks on those with less experience, and those with less experience don't have an opportunity to get more experience because no one will take the risk on them. And so it's this,
there's a lot of money on the
catch-22,
line.
and there's a lot of money and the stakes are high. And so that experience was incredible, like truly incredible, to have all women surrounding me on that project, especially because it was my first time directing, and I was also acting and writing, and we shot Band-Aid in 12 days, which was
only
insane.
12 days?
Yeah.
I didn't know it was that short.
We had so
That's
little money.
crazy.
And the fear that I found in my department heads, who were also women, in breaking their own patterns, because they're like, no, but my second is a dude I've worked with for 12 years. Like, you gotta let me work with him. We have a shared language. He's gonna. And I was just like, I'm so sorry, but you can't. And in the end, I think everyone was really grateful that they had been pushed beyond their comfort zones, not from the perspective of making some sort of socio-political stance, but because of the process. The process was really revelatory, and I remember, like, the day after we wrapped, my assistant director went on to a new project and was the only woman on the project, and we were sort of living in this utopia. And so I think the fall from grace was really difficult. It's changing incrementally. I do think it's changing incrementally, but it requires intentionality and a willingness to take risks, which I hate calling them, but it is what one would view as a risk in hiring someone that might have less experience than their white male counterpart.
Yeah, and also a risk given that this was really your first time directing, right? Like, there's a lot on the line for you career-wise in terms of, what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So for you to say, it's one thing like, oh, I've been doing this for a long time. Like, now I'm finally going to do this. I have cred and all of that. But like, you were, just at the beginning of trying to establish cred in that world. And for you to say, no, I'm going to do this, is pretty bold, right? And then to have your department heads, have to do that, because then you're in a conversation around like values versus like the quality of the film.
Yes.
Like, the quality of the film is going to suffer because the communication between the department heads and the people underneath them isn't going to be functional. That's going to affect you. And it's great that you hired all these women, but if the movie sucks, you're not going to get another chance to do this, right?
Yeah.
And the whole project, kind of collapses on top of itself.
Yeah, and that's what stops progress from happening, because I think that's like any sort of archaic institution that we're trying to poke holes in right now, is the idea that, but this works, but this is what we know. We can't change it because that everything's going to fall apart. It's like when you change it, actually the opportunities for greatness are so much bigger. And it was amazing to sort of have empirical proof of that. And again, like,
But there is a ballsiness for you being still a newcomer
For sure.
to do that, as opposed to an established, credible director with a track record of generating box office.
Yeah,
you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, so
Yeah.
that's pretty fucking cool.
thank
and
you.
ballsy and courageous.
It was cool. I mean, with Slip, like, there's no reason anyone should have trusted me to direct every single episode,
Right.
Like, that's a crazy thing for me to say. I'm going to do this on my first series that I've created. It's a risk. Like, I directed a pilot. It didn't go to series. I had a track record, but I do think you kind of have to, it requires a huge amount of like humility and confidence.
Where does that confidence come from? Is that your mom? Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, my mom made really bold and ballsy things in her work, not things. But she was definitely a disruptor. I think she was a disruptor without, I'm sorry, Mom, a sense of business. And so I think I saw that as a cautionary tale and said, how can I become a disruptor and be a player, like, that is taken seriously in the industry?
Not very many people can do that. Like, artists are not supposed to be business people. That's why there's managers and business managers and all these other people to kind of, create guardrails around them to allow them to create while, kind of providing some stability and infrastructure.
Yeah, but you have to be. Like, there's no, even as a director, like, if you don't make your day, however,
Right.
a 12-hour day, you're not going to get hired again, generally speaking. And so you have to, and you're also in an administrative position, right? You are the boss of a huge crew of people. And so the idea of like the purity of the artistic
Right.
experience is kind of bullshit, sadly. And I think if you can't toggle those two worlds, that's where you get into trouble. And it's what I witnessed in my upbringing. And I think I've tried my best to toggle both worlds. It does require,
It's a world of compromise, right?
yeah, it's like, yeah, compromise is so loaded a word. And that's always the line you're towing, because you have to be able to play the game, but you also have to be able to trust your gut when something is
Choose your battles.
is a betrayal of the vision or your integrity as an artist, and that's something I think that is only learned in time. Yeah.
What's the difference between directing a movie and being a showrunner on a TV show?
Well, there's a lot more episodes.
Yeah.
There's so
I
much
mean, you're
more
kind of like
room.
manning, it's sort of, to me, it feels like maybe the difference between, I don't know, going out on an expedition with, a smaller group of people versus like captaining like an aircraft carrier or something. Like, right? There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's so many more moving parts.
Yeah,
The
and
puzzle is much more complicated.
yeah, Roku didn't greenlight a second season, but they did greenlight a second season of Scripts. So I wrote the entire first season alone, but the second season I ran my first writer's room. And so that was really the conventional experience of being a showrunner. And that was really thrilling and cool. Again, it is both administrative and creative, and it's not dissimilar to directing in that there's a singular vision that a bunch of other visions are there to service. And I think your job as both a showrunner and director is to create an environment in which all of those visions are in harmony and conversation. And that obviously there's going to be a hierarchy, but I think that's like something that I work really hard at to create, a space in which everyone's artistry is showcased, and that is deeply felt, because I think that's when people do their best work.
But it's a different skill set. The challenge of writing and directing your own independent film feels like a journey into the soul, and it's about expressing your vision. And running a writer's room is about managing people and making sure that you're communicating adequately so that whatever is in your mind is being expressed by a collective group of people, right? Who are sharing, that sensibility and are able to translate that vision or those ideas onto paper and onto film and maintain like the tone that you've set, right? So it's like that's people skills versus like, my creative genius skill.
Yeah, but I think the thing that people don't talk about, or maybe they do, those same skills are very much at play as a director, even on an indie film, because it's like there are so many personalities and egos to manage. And a lot of the work is about creating that sort of like symbiosis that is a total wild social experiment, you know what I mean? That oftentimes is disastrous.
Like, how are we sharing this vision together, or
how do I communicate my vision so that everyone is on board to be servicing it while not feeling hemmed in, or that their vision is not like of equal merit. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that line, because and I think in a writer's room you have that same thing of when you want to create an environment in which every idea comes to the table and is met with intrigue and curiosity, and also have the wherewithal to say, and yet that has no place here. And that's really hard, especially for a person who's, a people pleaser or codependent in any way.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. After Band-Aid, you stepped up and kind of took a crack at a bigger budget movie with Craft, right?
Yeah.
Craft Legacy.
Well, Craft Legacy, yeah.
Yeah. Like kind of resurfacing this cult classic.
Yeah.
But that was, much more of a studio kind of movie, right? Like, did you go into that thinking, well, I'm going to hire an all woman crew for this as well and meet with resistance with that? Or, what was the process of, cracking that thing open?
Well, even with that film, like, clearly it was based on an existing property. Stakes were very high because the fans of that existing property are really intense.
Goth community. Gonna hold you to task.
Yeah. And I was working within the studio system as an independent filmmaker for the first time. Daryl and I had worked with Fox Searchlight together, but this was really my first foray as I had individuated from our creative partnership. So it just comes with such a new set of challenges. It still was the writing process for me. I had to go in and pitch on it. I had to pitch to Jason Blum at Blumhouse and to the execs at Columbia and Sony. And my take was still, my way in is always personal, like even with an existing property. So it was really my story of my own adolescence, and then, add a little witchcraft. But, of me living with my mom, just the two of us, and being in this sort of divinely feminine space, and then her getting a boyfriend and forcing me to move in with him and his 3 sons, which was quite a toxic masculine space at really such a crucial juncture in my own adolescence and coming into my own womanhood. And so that was my take. And then I, added a bunch of bells and whistles to it. And yeah, that process, there are so many more cooks in the kitchen, and there's so much more compromise, and there's, even when there's more money on the line, there's still never enough money, because I was making a big movie that required completely new tools for me as a filmmaker. So it was a very challenging experience. And I think part of me writing all of the first season of Slip after that experience was a protective measure.
Taking it back.
Yeah, I needed to. Yeah. And I needed to know that I could. And then to see that I was continuously given that protection by Roku and Tea Time, my producers, which is Dakota Johnson's company. Like, it was really, a very nourishing counterpoint.
So how do you know if you're going to get a second season? Depends on
we'll
how
find
well
out
it does.
end of May. Yeah.
So like as of the date of this recording, it hasn't come out yet.
No,
but
April
we'll
21st.
know, right? So,
yeah. April 21st, all 7 episodes drop. So hopefully people will binge it, and Roku will.
So they're all going to drop at the same time?
Yeah.
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 I think that's smart.
Yeah, I wrote it to be binged.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and they're half-hour episodes.
Yeah.
Not,
Yeah, they're easy. Yeah, I'm really excited. It's such a wild experience, like sharing something after it's lived inside you for so long.
What does that feel like? Vulnerable?
It feels a bit out of body, like very vulnerable. This is the most exposed.
I mean, yeah, you're very exposed. Let's just say you're very exposed. Yeah.
I'm very exposed. And so, yeah, I definitely feel scared, and I feel excited. And there's so much anticipatory sort of adrenaline that, it'll be interesting. There's always a postpartum that happens after it comes out, because it is a birth.
Sure.
And the high of that, of the release is so wild, and wildly vulnerable. And then you sort of have to figure out what's next.
Yeah. What does the creative process look like for you? I've had Stephen Pressfield in here, and I've had Robert McKee, and all these people who come in and talk about, the kind of art of creation and the kind of brass tacks of what it means to sit down and give birth to an idea. So how do you, what are your daily habits or your practices around creating these scripts or turning these ideas that you have into reality?
I don't know where I have been talking about it, and it's sort of an embarrassing way to talk about it, but it does feel like there's some sort of cosmic download. Like, I don't know, when people ask me the inception of these ideas for the projects that I write, I really don't have an inception point. I don't have a memory of when it came to be. It generally happens in a sort of liminal space. It's like upon waking or sleeping or in a shower. It's when my mind is given permission to turn off. I'll get an idea, and generally then it will sit. I'll sort of let it incubate for a year or two, usually because I'm working on something else.
But when it persists,
I know.
You're like, I need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I've never been impulsive. Like, I've never gotten an idea and been like, and we're writing. I sort of let it, because also, as I said, like, so many of those ideas are based in big questions. So I also want to have some time to figure out what the question is and what the facets of it are that I want to explore. But I don't have like a daily practice. When it's time to write and my body knows it's time to write, it's very clear to me. And then I will write incessantly until I have an entire script. and I'm a fast writer, but I won't. It'll be all day, every day. I'm not an early riser, so I'll wake up and I will generally just go right to my computer, which isn't the healthiest thing, and then I'll just write for 8 hours or something, and then I'll keep going until it's done. And then generally when it's done, I have to have nothing to do with it for a week, and I'll send it to like a trusted group of friends, and it'll usually take them a couple weeks to read. And then in that time, once I get their notes, I'll have at least enough distance to then be able to revisit it and go, oh yeah, this needs to change, that needs to change. But yeah, that's generally my process for writing. And then once I've got enough notes and feel it's ready, I'll send it to my team and go like, all right, let's strategize. How do we get this made? Which is an impossible thing to do, which is why I've made so many things independently. Yeah.
So a burst writer, but in the interim, when you're kind of collating these thoughts or there's ruminations around things that are recurring, do you like have a notebook and take notes? Do you use like the notes app on your phone? Like when something you're driving and you're in traffic, we live in Los Angeles, and you're like, oh shit, like, well, I need to remember this. Like,
I write in my notes app.
Stuff?
Yeah. I have so many notes in my notes app. I also try to talk about it. Like if I have an idea, I'll try to, because that kind of, I think it sort of cements it in a way. If I can say like, I had this idea for something today to a friend or a partner or my parents, sounding boards are really helpful.
Well, they can
for me.
stress test it.
Yeah.
And then also it cements it in your awareness.
Yeah.
It makes it more real.
Yeah, totally. I have a new movie that has been percolating for many years. I've been doing some of that, stress testing it, and just talking it through lately. And I find the creative process so fascinating in that way because it's so different for every person.
And how do you know whether one of these ideas is a TV show like Slip or a movie? Is it just how much runway is there to this story and what's the best medium? Because we're in this weird time where we've blurred the lines. I mean, what is television? I mean, is television, I mean, it's not even really a thing. It's like it's storytelling. Like what's the best, medium to tell the best version of this story? And then kind of like, fitting that to the right distribution platform for that.
Yeah. Slip was designed to be a TV show, and I guess I knew that
there's an episodic nature to it.
Yeah. And I think I also know what medium I'm looking to work in. So I knew that I wanted to create my own show. And I think then it was like, okay, what is that show? And what narrative lends itself to something episodic? And yeah, I think next up is a movie. I also am interested in writing a book. And that's been something that I've always wanted to do. So yeah, like different mediums excite me, especially ones that I'm less familiar with.
So it's not just the story. It's like, okay, I've done this, but I haven't done this thing over here yet, right?
Yeah. Do you have that?
I don't know. Do I have that? I don't know. I've been doing this thing for a long time. You know what I mean? I'm trying to stretch in a few other areas. I'm trying to get another book together.
Yeah, but when you write, like, are you like, okay, I want to push myself in this?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, I look back on stuff as any creative person does on things they've done in the past, and you're like, really, dude? So trying to grow and kind of meet the moment in a new and better way, for sure, right?
Yeah, I think it's the only way is to figure out, how to grow as an artist is to do things that you don't know how to do.
Right. And to not be so afraid of the thing that scares you that it paralyzes you from exploring it.
Yeah.
And I think that gets harder with success because it's easier to keep doing the thing. Like you could just be, like you're crushing as an actor right now. You could just be doing, like getting cast in whatever,
Oh God, it's so hard. I
It
mean,
doesn't look that way from the outside. It looks like you're getting cast in there. You're showing up in everything
oh, thanks.
right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice moment because I was able to act in brilliant directors' films and only do that and then create my own stuff, and that's such a nice thing to be able to do. But I mean, the amount of films I'm not acting in, do you know what I mean, versus the ones that I get, the ratio is impossible, and so it's so nice to be able to create my own work rather than sit and wait for someone else to give me the opportunity.
Right, because you can exert some agency, right, as opposed to being reactive to whatever comes to you.
Yeah, and to write the roles I want to play. And, unfortunately, like in this industry, the lists are very small. Again, the intersection of art and commerce, like the lists are very small of what actors can get something financed. I am not on those lists, at least not yet, And so like, it's an uphill battle to get cast, especially now that like Instagram influencers are of value, like
right.
the pool, the casting pool is like even more big and daunting. So yeah, for me to be able to write the characters that I'm dying to play is like a total
So how does it work? Like, your agent calls you and says, so-and-so wants to meet with you, or will you audition for this part, or this director is thinking of you for this, or, what is that experience like?
I'm still auditioning. She says resentfully. I do have a body of work that could be called upon if one wanted to, but I am still auditioning. So like with Ari Aster's movie Beau's Afraid that's coming out, or that's out now, I just auditioned. I put myself on tape.
Did you go after it?
No.
Were you like, I want this part, or I want this?
No, my team, like bless them, brought it to me and was like, this is an Ari Aster movie, and I'm his biggest fan, and but I wasn't given the script, so I had to fly completely blind. And when you see the movie, you'll see it's like a really complicated character. So I had no context. And I just had to use my director brain to go like, what's happening?
So wait, you auditioned without a script?
Yeah.
How do you even know what you're doing then? You play like Joaquin Phoenix's mother, the young Joaquin's mother, right?
Yeah, I play Joaquin's mother.
So
in
it
all
just
the
came out
flashbacks.
like today, I think, right?
Yeah,
like I wish I had seen it before.
I know.
Talking to you, but sorry, go ahead.
No, it's yeah. Oftentimes that with like auteurs, unless you're being given an offer for a role, they'll be really secretive around the script. So I've had to do that before, but this one was particularly challenging as a role, and Ari's dialogue is so brilliant, but it can be quite obtuse, So, yeah, I put myself on tape, and it was sort of like whenever I put myself on tape, I'm like, we'll see. I'm not hopeful. And then I got the call that Ari wanted to meet with me, and when we met, he offered me the part. I thought we were meeting, just as a meeting. Wow. But that was just the most thrilling thing in the world, and to get to be in his orbit and to get to witness his mastery of his craft. Like, I shot that before Slip. It was really inspiring. And same with Zach Braff's movie, who I know was on the pod.
Right.
I auditioned. I put myself on tape and got the part.
That's how it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were great.
Thanks.
I loved that you played Florence's sponsor. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And you were like, no bullshit with her.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I told Zach, I've seen the movie a couple times now. Like, he did a really good job of being authentic to what that world and that experience is like for somebody who isn't part of that world, and also Florence, who doesn't come from
She's
that
unbelievable.
subculture. I mean, she's a fucking genius.
Yeah,
You know, it's
she's
unbelievable
truly-
what she's capable
Yeah.
of, like the pathos that she's able to, you know, bring to the screen just with her face is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable performance,
Yeah.
and it's so beautifully directed and written. Yeah, it was really cool to be a part of both of those films. Because also, you know, you create these little families, and now I consider all those people my friends, which is so cool.
Yeah, that movie is beautiful. And, you know, this isn't like a film podcast. So there's a lot of people who aren't like, you know, Cine East. So for those that don't know, like, you know, people listen to Zach, but maybe people don't know who Ari Aster is. I mean, this guy, I mean, Hereditary, Midsommar. I think Midsommar is just one of the most brilliant movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And again, Florence Pugh just like crushing in this movie that is unlike anything you've ever seen. It's equal parts beautiful and horrifying and confusing. And I mean, just the kind of number of conflicting emotions that you experience watching this movie. So the anticipation of his newest movie, Beau is Not Afraid, is at a peak, right?
Yeah.
And all I've seen is the trailer. What a gift that you're able to participate in this movie. Like, I can't wait to see it. And I really believe that this guy is like, you know, he's among the greats. And he's only at the beginning of his career.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think he's one of the greatest filmmakers of our time. And to witness what he's done with this film is really incredible. It's 3 hours long.
I know, it's 3 hours. Based on the trailer, like there's a, you know, it's obviously this surrealistic, you know, kind of experience of him. Like, I guess he's trying to go visit his mom, and like there's all kinds of craziness ensues. But just based on that alone, it feels very Charlie Kaufman, kind of Synecdoche, New York.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got like a Coen Brothers Kaufman-esque vibe for sure. And Ari's mastery of like the visual cinematic language is really something to behold. Like I highly recommend seeing it in a theater. It is so incredible, and Joaquin's performance is incredible. I mean, the whole cast is amazing, but it's an epic, sort of demented dark comedy.
And what is it like when? All right, so Ari Aster, genius. Like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Like, what is the experience of working with an auteur who has that level of command and vision?
I mean, it is like a master class. I because I was in front of the camera and I didn't want to be like annoying and like shadow him when I wasn't on
but you
camera,
are a director also, right? I'm sure you're like paying attention to everything with some level of hypervigilance.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things that I took away from that experience was the intentionality of his shots, like how much he fits into one frame is really like unbelievable and inspiring and inspired. His mastery of tone is something that I am also always trying to navigate, and going between comedy and deeply felt scenes and horror, and it's like an amazing absurdity, yeah. But something that I really took away from it was his sense of play, and I think, you know, in sort of it's aligned with what we've been talking about, with what I set out to create in the environment on my sets. Like, stakes are so high. We're doing really intense scenes. He does a lot of takes, but it never feels like punishing or exacting. It feels fun and like experimental, and that there's so much room because he has a sort of, I mean, he has a complete command over what he's doing, but there is like a childlike energy that is so exciting to be around, and allows for, I guess, just a lot of breathing room in terms of performance as an actor. And so that was really inspiring.
And what is it like to work with Joaquin?
You know, I only
mean,
have
there's
one.
such a mythos that like surrounds that guy. You know,
I didn't really get to work with him. I only have one tiny scene in which that we shared, but I found him to be lovely. Him and Ari had an amazing working relationship, and we just premiered the film, and yeah, he was so sweet. And we hadn't really gotten to know each other. Came up to me and talked to me about my performance.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was cool.
I saw some photos or videos of the premiere with you guys. Like,
Yeah.
hanging out. Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
that-
determined to get that guy on the podcast.
Oh man, he's such a brilliant actor. So yeah, just to share any space with him on screen is really a dream come true.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
That movie's gonna come. It's gonna make a big splash.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it about A24? Like they just seem to be
Magic
like their
dust.
finger is on the pulse
Yeah.
of everything zeitgeist. The level of understanding like what's going to work and kind of being at the cutting edge of not just what's cool, but what's of the highest caliber in terms of what's going to work in the marketplace, but also what is most interesting creatively, I
Yeah.
think is almost some kind of magic that they're doing right now. Right?
I know.
Even with like Beef, which just came out, which is
Yeah.
just like crushing. And I guess they've done some TV in the past, but this is really their entree
Yeah.
into television.
Yeah. You know, I guess it is their commitment to not being fear driven, right? Like if you were to
There's a courage to what they're doing. I
yeah,
think.
they're
Yeah.
trusting filmmakers in the singularity of their vision, whatever medium, And I think that is a testament to what creates the best work and what speaks to people. Like, I think that's what's so interesting about when you look at like the studio system, there's such an attention to creating something for a mass audience. And I think what's misguided about the process a lot of the time is that the idea is that you're supposed to water it down. And when you see a company like A24 who instead is sharpening the singularity of a vision, and that's what's actually speaking to such mass audiences, like what a great lesson.
I think that's so true.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. I think that's a powerful lesson for anybody who's thinking about, birthing something creative, right? Like the resonance of it is found in the specificity,
Yes.
not in and the specificity is what creates the universal connection, not the other way around. And by watering it down and making it seemingly, kind of relatable to everybody, you've lost, it's so general and diffuse that it doesn't connect at all. Like it's working at cross purposes with that goal. And it's like the more specific, detailed to somebody's, lived experience or creative expression, that's what works, right?
Absolutely.
It seems weird that would be radical or kind of like the contrary, the hot take.
I know.
You know what I mean? But obviously it's working with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the proof is really in the pudding. I mean, I also think like for anyone in any creative pursuit, making something with an audience in mind, to me, is always sort of like the death knell, Like make something that you want to, like what is the story you want to tell? And that's what you put out into the world. Because when you start to be, I think, product-oriented over process-oriented, it can get you into some trouble.
And yet it is a business. And, there are people sitting around conference room tables trying to figure out if it's going to work in China or it's going to work in this other place. And those are the things that dictate budgets.
Yeah, I mean, when I say it's like, figure out what story you want to write. If I was talking to like a filmmaker, I would say, figure out what story you want to write, what story you have to write. and then think about a way to make it cheaply. You know, like I'm not taking business out of the equation because I think you do have to be pragmatic. If you're a first-time filmmaker and you write some huge epic, it's never going to get made. And that might be the story you think you need to tell, but if you distilled that story down, what's the contained version of it? And then go, you know, figure out a way to make that, because every single project I've ever made has had 1,000 no's before there's been any yes.
So how do you like weather the rejection? Because you're in a business, you've become very successful in this business, but it's a business of, like you said, you know, mostly no's.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of like hold true to yourself and what you're doing and not, you know, get overly dissuaded by that.
I guess it comes back to confidence, which is hard, right? Like, because no's will diminish your confidence. I've always had something where I don't believe them. It doesn't mean that I don't take notes, right? Like if someone says no, I have to look at what they're saying no to and what I can shift. But it requires such tenacity to keep going. And that tenacity is ultimately like an unwavering sense of self, or a sense that you have something that deserves a voice. And I don't know how to cultivate that necessarily, except for to just keep going. I think you just have to keep going. And I think making your own work is really important. Like Daryl and I made work in the face of 1,000 no's by just going and doing it ourselves. And, you know, that's a real stress test of the work.
Yeah, I feel like just in looking at like the projects that you guys did together, it feels like you just pulled this shit out of your ass. Like you're like, well, we're gonna go make this movie, and I'm like, what? And then like somehow you're like out in the street, like shooting, like you progress as if, like even if all the pieces aren't together, like you're just in motion, moving forward. And you know, when you create that momentum, somehow everything else, you know, those other problems that seem insurmountable start to get resolved. Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's like manifesting, I guess 101. It is like, I am doing it. You can tell me no and I can take a note and shift something. You can tell me no and say, well, we have something else like it, which is what you're always hearing. Or, you know, like, and it's like, well, but do you? And can't there be many things that are in the same world but have different voices behind them? And yeah, I guess it is about, in some ways, pulling it out of your ass.
What's the like worst piece of advice that you've gotten from some kind of like studio person? Or I'm sure you've heard some bangers.
Yeah. Oh God.
We're not naming names.
I know. I'm trying to think of like worst piece of advice. Sadly, like it's almost more diminishing than bad advice. It's really just
ad hominem.
Yeah. I think it was more when I was young, and I've named this name before, and I'll name him again. But I went to David Mamet's acting school, and I was 18, and he came and gave a guest class and told me that my shelf life was short as an actor. And that's probably the worst, the worst piece of advice I've ever been given. If you could call it advice.
Oh, no.
It's like someone just took like a steaming shit on my chest.
Yeah. And like, yeah, oh man, that could not have been fun.
No, but you know, then later he saw a sketch that I had written, and he was notoriously cruel and said, who wrote that? And I said, I did. And he said, you should write a feature. So, you know.
Interesting. You should write him a letter now. No.
This is my letter to him.
Okay. David.
Dear David.
Zoe is on the scene. Conversely, what about like some of the best advice that you've gotten over the years?
Well, I guess the best advice I ever was given was by a producer named Alex Madigan, who took me to coffee and said, "You should direct." And I didn't know that. And it's like a wildly simple piece of advice, but I think that it does take sometimes, I think it, for many people, but especially for women and especially for women in film, like this sense of confidence, even if you don't know, or if you haven't gone to film school, if you don't have every answer, you don't know every lens, you know, that someone saw that and said, go do it. You got it. And that's really all it took.
To have that outside external voice see something in you that maybe you're not ready to see in yourself.
Yeah. Which I think has happened for me every time. I mean, that David Mamet story was that for me too. I was writing, but I wasn't like, no, I should go write a feature, you know? And even when I was in high school and I was acting, I was in the chorus of a musical. I had no confidence as an actor. And some like parent in the PTA was like, you're really good. You're the one I'm watching in the background. And so I guess tell people when you think they're talented, because it's really meaningful and it's a really hard world across all industries. And those are really character building moments in terms of giving someone, a sense of value in the craft that they might be interested in, but too afraid to pursue.
I like that. You know, I think that you don't, also, you know, as somebody who's older, you don't know the impact that your words have on somebody else. And when I reflect back and I remember certain things that certain people said to me, I'm sure they have no memory of, you know, like that nice thing that they said. And those things really can be meaningful.
Yeah.
Obviously, equity and empowerment are really important subjects to you in terms of you know, trying to, you know, build on ramps to, you know, a career in this business that you're in, and kind of changing the landscape. We're still, you know, kind of in the wake of Harvey Weinstein and, you know, Me Too and all that kind of stuff. And you've been, you know, a really kind of powerful voice in that conversation. What's your sense of kind of changes that have been made, changes that still need to be made? Like, I feel like the whole kind of streaming situation, everything's sort of up in the air, and it makes it rife for reinvention and new models. Like, we just saw what Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are doing with artist equity, and, you know, basically they've created this new production company where all the crews are participating on an equity basis in these projects. And that's something that's never been done before, and it's fucking awesome. And so I think there is real opportunity to kind of rewrite the rules. And you're somebody who I know thinks a lot about this and has taken action on this. So, like, where's your head at with all of that right now?
I guess my head is like, I feel hopeful. I do feel hopeful. I think there have been strides that have been made, and I think there's still a really long way to go.
Yeah.
And it requires a huge amount of intentionality from the people at the top. And I guess, my hope is that it won't just be for optics, you know, that people see the actual inherent value in diversifying voices in a room, and changing up who's also in charge. But, you know, it's wild, I think, how far we still do have to go. Like, I say that I have hope, and I do, but just yesterday I did an interview with like an esteemed publication, and the journalist said, "What's it like to fake so many orgasms? You must have done that in your real life a bunch too." And I thought, God,
Let's get to the real important stuff.
So far to go, man. Like that's
Yeah.
top of mind for you to ask me. And I do think in some ways Slip is going to be an interesting test in terms of what,
the discourse will be around it.
Yeah, and what the discourse will be around my exploration of sexuality and female pleasure. And I hope that it pushes the envelope in a good way, because I do think that that's a part of it, like that in the wake of Me Too, which, we're still in many ways, but that I think one of the most threatening things is women's sexuality. I mean, we look at it with women's reproductive rights. It's like the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. It's just unbelievable the power we hold, and how threatening that power is. And I hope that there's some way to shift the perspective. It's the same thing about equity and inclusivity. It's like this idea that if we change it, it's going to be a mess, or the people who have been in power so long have to feel a threat rather than a sense of excitement at not even, a change of guard, but like what that could open up for the world at large and for the guard themselves,
Or just a paradigm shift in perspective from perceiving it as a threat to perceiving it as the greatest opportunity for growth and, kind of nourishment and economic viability.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you look at trans rights just being demolished across the country at the same time as reproductive rights and the same time as racial inequity. And in some ways, the pushback has allowed for so many more voices to come into the fold where, all of these incredible trans advocates are being, are using their platform to say, we're all in this, like, and parents of trans kids and all of that. It's like, I feel inspired amidst the sort of bleak atmosphere that we're in, because I do think we're at a crossroads. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the entrenchment around Hollywood specifically is not, under threat is the wrong word, but is, being challenged to, reimagine itself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's happening in some respects, and in other ways, there's a holding on to an old way of doing things, which I guess is natural. This is the way it always is with everything.
Yeah.
But I feel like those changes are inevitable. So I'm optimistic, and I think it's a really interesting time.
Yeah.
And for yourself as somebody who's creating in this space, there's so much more. I mean, the fact that you're like making the show with Roku, like there's so many avenues and opportunities to do cool things, and they're leaving you alone, and you're getting to do all this kind of stuff. Like that didn't exist, that long ago. And we're at this point now where it's like, there's so much shit. Like I have to go, I have to talk to other people and go online and like, what should I be watching? Like there's so much great, awesome stuff out there. Whereas it used to just be like, we're just waiting for that one thing for months, to like nourish us. And now we're in this cornucopia of like just amazing riches. Art that we can, pursue.
Yeah. It is an exciting time.
And yet the business model of it has changed, right? There's no syndication money, like all the back end and all that kind of stuff. So all the economics of it are being upended, and everyone's trying to figure out like a new way.
Yeah, network television is freaking out.
As they should be. Yeah. I mean, that's fucking some broke ass shit right there, right? It's amazing it's still holding on in the way that it is. Like, get over it already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or push yourself to make, bolder choices.
Right. Right. And you say that as somebody who's done the sitcom thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's wild that so many people watch that shit still.
So many people.
I know.
And it bought me a house. So God bless all those
Good
people.
for you. All right. Well, the last thing I want to kind of pursue with you before, releasing you to your life is just, in kind of closing here, I always want to try to leave people with some inspiration around engaging or re-engaging with their own creativity and their own voice in perhaps a way that people feel like they don't have permission to. Like, you're in this world, like this is your job, right? But for most people, like, they're doing other stuff. And I'm of the firm belief that we're all creative beings and we all have a voice and we all have something interesting to say, and there's no one else out there. You are your own, you are a unique being. And I'm always encouraging people to kind of explore that and find a way to bring expression to your unique lived experience. So, how do you kind of encourage that in individuals or think about how you do that yourself?
Well, I think an exciting thing about this moment in the world, and while social media is, a nightmare hellscape, it is also a way for people to see that there are weirdos like them everywhere. I mean, I identify as a weirdo too. When I was growing up, I didn't know, necessarily how to find the weirdos or how to feel less alone and what to do with those feelings of alienation. And so I hope that people are emboldened to tell their stories in whatever way they want to, right? Like, there's so many modes of self-expression, but I think what I've learned in all of my therapies is that depression is when rage is turned inwards, or when you're collapsing in on yourself because there's not a mode of expression. And so I'm a firm believer in figuring out what that mode of expression is, because I do think it's what will save your life.
Yeah, I think that's wise. Rather than pushing it down, finding a way to shine a light on it and expose it in a way, and deconstruct it for yourself and share it in a way that creates a sense of bond with the other people who are feeling that way, because we all feel alone in those weird emotions that we have.
We all feel alone all the time.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm asked what I want audiences to take away from Slip or anything I make, I just say I want them to feel less alone, because it is why I make things. Yeah. It's the most powerful tool, and the most and such a transformative experience as a viewer for me when I see something and feel less alone. That's why we consume art. I
mean, in Slip, there is this sense that you are very alone in this relationship. You're in this intimate relationship, but there's a severe lack of intimacy, and you're trying to figure out, like, what am I doing here? You go on this adventure, and whatever ensues. But I think there's something universal in that, like the idea that we're in our lives, but we're always thinking about, like, would our life be better if we were over here as opposed to here? And that's connective tissue that, I think we can all, relate to deeply.
Yeah, especially at this moment, sort of post-pandemic. I think the sense of aloneness is something deeper than we've ever been willing to really talk about, and I think talking about it is a great thing. I think it is one of the most profound experiences I've had in the aftermath of quarantine, is that when you ask people how they are, now they actually tell you.
Right. That is true, right? Yeah.
They're like, not great. Life's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, it's true. Well, cool, man. I think we did it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be back in
Yeah.
this beautiful new space.
I love you, Zoe.
I love you too.
I'm such a fan. And like I said at the outset, it's been so fun to watch your kind of career take off in the way that it has. It's well-deserved, and I can't wait to see what you do next. So you've got Slip coming. By the time this podcast comes out, it will be out on Roku. Beau is Not Afraid in movie theaters, wherever you live, right? Worldwide.
Yeah, I think so.
And then what else? Do you have anything else coming out?
No, we'll just, if you watch Roku and watch Slip Season 1, then you'll help me get a Season 2. So.
All right, there we go. Let's crowdsource Season 2 for Zoe. There's the deal, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Yeah, peace.